Before we start the show, I have a huge favour to ask you. I promise you it'll take 2 minutes to do. I'm taking a punt and getting everyone I know to vote for the Psychocinematic podcast in the Listener's Choice category of the Australian Podcast Awards. Your vote would mean everything to me. So, open your browser right now. Oh wait. Go to australianpodcastawards.com. Click on the Listener's Choice Awards Vote Now link. Search for Psychocinematic, spelled PSYCHOCINEMATIC. Click on the first option and submit. Check your email, including your spam, because to make your vote count, it'll ask you to verify it there. You are all sweet, gorgeous angels, and I'm just so thankful to have an audience who listens and enjoys this podcast. I love you all to the moon and back. Okay, here's the episode.
I think when I first started watching Schitts Creek, Mum knew I'd watched it and I didn't tell her because she's like, you're doing Alexis, because I just took on so many mannerisms, which is another thing some of us do when we get really into a movie or a TV show.
Yeah. Welcome to Psychocinematic, a podcast where we analyse depictions of mental illness and disability in popular films and TV. I'm your host, Stephanie Fornasia. If you love our podcast and want to give us some support, make sure you're following Psychocinematic Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And check out our website, psychocinematicpodcast.com. For access to special bonus content, episodes, early access, stickers, and contribute to our regular fundraisers, join our Patreon. Starting from $3.50 a month, you can be the coolest psychocinematic listener there is. I'd like to start the podcast today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're recording this podcast today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that we are currently sitting on stolen land. And I'd like to introduce to the podcast today Marie Camin. Have I said your last name right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yay. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Marie. You're someone I've been following on Instagram for a while, who is a neurodivergent, neuroaffirming psychologist and a big advocate for autism awareness, ADHD awareness, etc. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do, all about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a psychologist, and so I do a lot of assessment, identifying autism and ADHD, as well as supporting clients, and then more recently branched out into supervision so we can upskill multiple psychologists at once in how to be neuroaffirming, which is, what I'm passionate about.
And I really love that because as a psychologist who isn't neurodivergent and has worked so long in my career with neurodivergent kids, I gain a lot of information and advice from yourself in your snippets and things that you share on social media, and also your live chats as well, which I've seen a few times. And also you were on the Yellow Ladybugs panel as well. Yeah,
I did a panel with them on neuroaffirming alternatives to the standard kind of behavioural interventions that we do with kids. And then on day 3, I shared a bit of my lived experience as well separately, which was, that was huge, and never thought I'd do that. Never thought I'd even tell people I was autistic as a psychologist. So
how's that changed professional life and personal life for you, sharing that with everyone?
Well, a lot of my clients knew anyway. Either they were like, yeah, Marie, it's so obvious, or I in the language that I use when I say like, oh, brains like ours, and what we need. And so, a lot of my clients knew anyway, but I think it's been better than, I was a bit scared about kind of stigma and discrimination, and that happens, and it has happened, but the overwhelming majority has been really positive. So that's been good.
Excellent. I feel like in my experiences when practicing with kids, like sharing a little bit about how things relate to me as well, to be like, I've gone through this as well, and I can relate to that sort of experience. It can be really powerful when you have a client, particularly working with kids.
Oh, I find, especially with sensory stuff, like I find a lot of kids downplay what they're feeling and will say, I can see them squinting, and I'm like, I can put the blind down, and they're like, no, it's fine. And then immediately I'm like, no, I know what it's like to not be able to focus because the sun's glaring in your eyes. I'm just going to put it down for you. And then they're like, oh, yeah. And then we'll go on a tangent about, the kind of sensory experiences, and because they've got that permission to, I guess, after I'm a bit casual about it and validating validated and say, oh, yeah, I feel that too.
Yeah. How was it, because you were diagnosed as an adult, is that correct?
So I self-identified, I figured out I was autistic around 15 years of age, but then I wasn't diagnosed until 30 because I couldn't afford an assessment. And I was also really scared to pay, a few $1,000s to be told I wasn't autistic when I know I am, because I'm a psychologist, and I was like, who's going to take that seriously? You work with people, you must have people skills and be empathetic. Like, yeah, and I'm also autistic.
Yeah.
But ADHD, I was 30 as well, and I actually had no idea I was an ADHD, which is hilarious now, because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like very hyperactive, but I just thought it was anxiety, I guess.
So did that come with that diagnosis of the autism? Was ADHD sort of as a result of that as well, that diagnosis?
Not so much. I did them separately, and the ADHD came from working with kids with ADHD and then noticing so many similarities with what I was like as a kid. And I was like, oh, maybe this is something I should also be considering.
Yeah.
And I wasn't convinced when I went to see the psychiatrist, and he spoke to me for 10 minutes and he's like, yeah, you definitely have ADHD. And I was like, no. But yeah, I don't know. He just, the way I was talking, maybe it was like a million miles an hour, I suppose.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, it took you so long to actually get that diagnosis. Once you initiated the process, was it, even as a psychologist, was it difficult or was it fairly smooth?
So it was fairly smooth because I knew what to expect, because I do it for a living.
Yeah.
I think if I didn't, I probably would have felt a bit disoriented, because it's very quick and then there's no kind of post-support afterwards, which I know is a lot of people have that experience as well. But I was okay. I think the thing that took me by surprise was, even though I knew I was autistic, having someone else validate it initially was a huge relief and felt really validating. And then I think for a few months after that, I noticed a lot of social anxiety crop up, where I was really hyper aware of my differences when before I wasn't really.
Because you've got that validating.
Yeah, so I'm like, someone else can notice that my communication style is different. And so then I became a bit hyper aware of like, well, are other people picking up on this? Is this why people don't like invite me to things or say that I'm a bit intimidating when they first meet me and things like that? So it made me really aware and reflecting and observing all the time, which was exhausting.
Yeah, for sure.
But that kind of faded after a while.
Oh, so. That's good to know. So for anyone who, because there's a few people in my life who feel this way, feel that they're autistic, but are sort of thinking, I know I'm probably autistic. I don't know what I will get out of paying thousands of dollars to have someone say what I already know. What advice would you give those people?
I think...
also ADHD too.
Yeah. Self-identification is valid. And to be honest, every adult I've assessed who has spent years thinking they could be autistic and done heaps of their own research, they're not wrong. Like, I've never had anyone be wrong about being autistic when they strongly relate to it and have done so much reading on it. So I think it is valid, and you don't really need a diagnosis unless it depends what you need it for. So I only decided to make it official because I started doing a PhD and I needed adjustments in the PhD, like being able to have meetings from home instead of on campus. So that's why I got it. But unless you really need NDIS funding or accommodation, something where you need the official diagnosis, you don't really need one. It's such a personal decision.
Yeah, that's good advice. So on that note, you decided what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, it was hard. I had so many things I wanted to talk about.
But it was very funny when you sent me an email and said, stop everything, we're doing Schitts Creek. And I was like, yes, okay, good.
Yeah.
What made you decide to choose this one?
It's one of my favourite shows. And one thing that many, not all, but many autistic people do is watch their favourite things on repeat. So I've seen it, I can't even tell you how many times. Every few months I'll watch it from beginning to end. So I love it. And I think because it's my favourite show, it didn't even pop into my head when I was thinking of things to talk about. And then I just put it on Netflix one day and I was like, oh my God, of course I would talk about this on Psychocinematic. There's just so many characters who are coded autistic, ADHD and ADHD. I reckon Jocelyn's the only neurotypical, to be honest.
I'm so glad you picked this because it's also like one of my comfort shows as well. And I watched it over during the first COVID lockdown, and I also had a newborn. So I associate it with breastfeeding or pumping.
Yeah.
Or just trying to just have a lie down. I think this rewatch was maybe my fourth rewatch because it's just so easy to just keep watching.
Yeah, really short episodes and they just flow really nicely into each other. So sometimes I'll just put it on and all of a sudden I'm at season 3. I'm like, how did that happen?
So I might just talk a little bit about the plot. I'm definitely not going to go into everything that happens, just a general overview. But interestingly, the concept came from Dan Levy, who wondered how wealthy families like in the Keeping Up with the Kardashians, etc., in reality TV, how they would react if they lost all their money. Dan was also inspired by the fact that Kim Basinger bought a town, which he thought would be used for location shoots, but then lost a lot of money on it. So with those two concepts together came Schitts Creek. So the premise is that the wealthy Rose family, video store magnate Johnny, played by Eugene Levy, his wife and former soap opera actress Moira, played by Catherine O'Hara, and their pampered adult children David, played by Dan Levy, and Alexis, played by Annie Murphy, lose their fortune after being defrauded by their business manager. They rebuild their lives with their sole remaining asset, which is a remote town named Schitts Creek, which Johnny bought for David's birthday in 1991 as a joke, which I always found so funny.
It's great.
That you would buy a town as a joke.
I know. That's how much money they had, everyone. That's how much money.
And it's kind of repeated in many episodes that Johnny's so bad at buying gifts, like when he buys Stevie the makeup, the suitcase full of makeup, and also the Christmas episode where he just goes to a rummage sale and they're just random bits of rubbish. But it turns out that Schitts Creek is the best gift he could ever buy.
Yeah, they had somewhere to live.
Yes. So the Roses are forced to relocate to Schitts Creek, moving into 2 adjacent rooms and a rundown motel. While the family adjusts to their new lives, their well-to-do attitudes conflict with the town's more provincial residents, including Mayor Roland Schitt, played by Chris Elliott, his wife Jocelyn, Jen Robertson, and their son Mutt, Tim Rosen. The motel's manager, Stevie Budd, Emily Hampshire, town council members Ronnie Lee, played by Karen Robinson, and Bob Curry, played by John Hemphill, and vet Ted Mullins.
Love Ted.
He's so sweet and so very hot.
Yes.
Played by Dustin Milligan, and Jazzagal member and Cafe Tropical waitress Twyla Sands, played by Sarah Levy. And what follows is a lot of growth, character development, learning, loving, and bonding. Is there anything you wanted to share about the show before we sort of get into the nitty-gritty of the characters or your own thoughts about it?
No, I just love the character development in this show. I don't know if this is other people's experience, but when I started watching it, I was not a fan of this family at all.
Same. I watched a few episodes and I don't think I like this.
Yes, but I know my mum had watched it and she knows me so well. And she was like, Marie, I promise you're going to love it. So I pushed through because I trusted her word. And yeah, it gets so good. And I ended up falling in love with this family. So, and with Ted, I'm not going to lie. Ted is great.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a grower show. And a lot of people will say, oh, I didn't get into it. And you have to kind of say, just keep watching. It gets so good. And they just become your own family members.
Yes.
So should we get stuck into some of the characters?
Let's do it. I'm so excited.
Same. I guess we've got a little list, but who would you like to particularly start with? Is there anyone in particular?
Is there anyone in particular you would like to start with?
Can we leave Moira till last?
Oh, yes.
I feel like we're going to have a lot to say about her.
There's so much to say about Moira. We could start with Ted.
All right, let's start with Ted. You had some thoughts about how he was maybe coded?
Yeah. So it took me probably till the second or third watching through of this show to pick his autistic traits because he is really diplomatic and friendly, and so I think it's easier to miss in him.
Yeah.
But he is, and even in my work I see such diversity in autistic people, like huge diversity, and there is this little like subset of people who are just so gentle and really passive in their social relationships. Like they're happy to kind of go along with what everyone's suggesting as long as it doesn't go against their kind of morals or ethics. Yeah. And he fits that kind of profile. So I did miss it the first time around. But yeah, he has a few traits.
One thing that you mentioned is the puns, which I love about him. I love a good pun.
Yeah, so this is something as well that I've noticed with autistic people. Puns comes from, for those who don't know, we have a tendency to interpret language literally, which comes in really handy when thinking of wordplay and puns and playing with language. So, I have plenty of people in my life who are just epic at puns and autistic. But yeah, he loves his puns. And I love how towards the end of the series, Alexis starts saying puns as well. And it's like their little bonding moment. It's very cute.
Yeah, totally. I really like what you said then about, sticking with his values and just kind of going with it. I think a good example that you said in the notes was how there's that competitive veterinarian, Miguel, who uses his body to get clients, and Ted doesn't see how that he's got very strong ethics about, that's not the way to do it. And then when he accidentally has his shirt off when they film the webcam of the bunnies. The bunnies, that's right. And he, he has heaps of engagement because he's taken his shirt off. And that's just like, what to him?
And he was really kind of, distressed almost about the fact that people had seen him with his shirt off and he felt like he was exploiting the bunnies, and it was he's so great. I think another thing too is that real love for animals too. I know I've met a lot of autistic people who have this beautiful relationship with animals, and
I've met
a few who have never been around animals. So they actually think they're not an animal. They're like, I really don't like animals. And some people don't, and that's fair. But yeah, I have seen people that have just never been around animals. And then they meet like my cat, or they meet an animal in the clinic or something, and they're like, oh, wow, this is so easy. And they just love being in the company of animals. I'm like, yeah, you don't have to talk to them. Yeah. They get it.
You can have a conversation and they just listen.
Yeah. So easy to connect with.
Yeah, totally. And then I guess also with Ted is his relationship with Alexis and how that changes over time, and how he sort of just kind of goes along with what he thinks Alexis wants.
Yes.
But he sort of misinterprets that.
He does, yeah. Is there a specific example you're thinking of?
I'm sort of thinking about when he asked Alexis to marry her, and she says, oh, I would, but I have to go. I have to leave.
Yeah, we're relocating.
Yeah.
Which is his kind of literal interpretation of her and taking people on face value.
Yeah.
So he's like, oh, you're moving away. That's why you don't want to marry me. So then when he finds out she's not moving away, he's like, oh, great. So we're getting married now. And she feels really awkward in that situation. But yeah, it's that really kind of literal or pragmatic thinking of, I suppose a neurotypical might be more inclined to be like, oh, could we maybe chat about ways we could make long distance work? Yeah. But he was like, oh, she said she's moving and she wouldn't then be keen on long distance, so I'll just leave it kind of thing.
And not sort of also interpreting between the lines that she probably doesn't want to get married.
And missing that she could be being polite and hinting, that she doesn't want to marry him,
But I think towards the end of the season, end of the series, when they are back together again and he goes to the Galapagos, I can't say that word. Galapagos. He's much better at interpreting what Alexis needs and wants, and
they really get to know each other.
Get to know each other better. Yeah, they're more vulnerable with each other. Let their masks down a little bit, so they are able to really understand what each other needs and wants for a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even loved Alexis in that moment. And I know we're not talking about her, but I'll forget for sure. She kind of goes and talks to Twyla and about moving because the context is Ted has done so much for her in their relationship, and she feels she hasn't really given much back by way of sacrifices. And so she kind of goes to Twyla for confirmation that, like, oh, I shouldn't go to the Galapagos, right? Like, tell me that's the right decision. And Twyla kind of points out, but he's sacrificed a lot for you and maybe it's your turn.
Yeah.
And then Alexis gets it and it clicks for her that that has been maybe not quite equitable.
Yeah, unbalanced.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess if you interpret Ted as not picking up on some cues, it's a good message that neurodivergent people can pick up on cues once they've sort of figured out the environment, like what the rules are.
We have really good pattern recognition.
Yes, once you figure out the pattern.
Yeah, so once you've got enough data, like you've observed someone for a while, you can really... So it's more an intellectual thing you learn as a skill rather than it being just innately something your brain can decode.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great example. I never thought of it that way. Thank you.
I'm glad I got it right. So let's talk about David.
Oh my God. I love David so much.
David. I could watch David say his things all day.
Oh.
So what do you think about David? I get a sense he's probably autistic coded, but what are your thoughts?
So I would say Ted has traits. I'm not convinced I could get through the whole series and have enough of the like DSM criteria for Ted. David, I absolutely can. Like he is just autistic coded all over the place.
Yeah.
I love it.
What sort of traits do you think David has that makes him autistic?
There's just so much, and I know I like generated a huge list for David. Like just broadly, he has really struggled with his social relationships. And like, yes, we would consider the context of he was very wealthy and there's a level of disconnection that comes with that.
Yeah.
But then even amongst wealthy people, he wasn't really connecting with others. So I think just broadly, he has really struggled to connect with people. There's also a lot of hints that he perhaps didn't really understand the social relationships that he's been in. So, yeah, I think he spoke a lot about having dated the photographer. He dated the photographer who very clearly is not like a monogamy person.
Yeah.
And he has totally missed that and was really hurt by him being with other people. And then also about bullying. So in season 3, Moira mentions that she doesn't want David to relive being bullied. And then David says, it wasn't that bad. And kind of Moira says that's because he was blissfully unaware.
Yeah.
And I've seen kids being horrifically bullied and they really aren't picking up that that's what's happening, which I think is kind of protective in the moment, definitely. Yeah. But then I also work with adults who only now are starting to process that they were bullied because they didn't pick up on it as kids.
Especially if they continue those connections with people that have really treated them quite badly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting how you say the social relationships that he hasn't quite understood or been able to be himself in. I read Dan Levy said that David's character is someone who has spent his entire life being someone else, which I thought was a really good, you could definitely see that in that he sort of discovers who he is more in Schitts Creek.
Yeah,
and
he does.
Even when they are going to go back to New York, he's sort of tempted by that idea, like, back to my friends that I had.
Familiarity.
Yeah, and then Stevie's like, they're not coming to your wedding, so...
Yeah, so he's also misjudged the level of friendship that he had with those people. That's another really common experience and quite distressing for autistic people is they're not sure. Like, so we kind of don't really hang out with people if we don't like them. Like, it's not something we'll just fake doing unless you have to be safe.
Yeah.
But so generally, if we want to spend time with people, it's because we want to be their friend. So it's really hard to gauge why someone else would want to spend time with you and talk to you about things that are personal if they don't really want to be your friend. Like, that's really confusing. Yeah. So, it's a great example of him kind of misjudging other people's experience of that interaction.
Or what they get out of the friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
Oh, the teenagers stealing from his store.
Yes.
Yeah, I felt that one. That has happened to me before. Not exactly the same, but like when someone's ulterior motive is really not obvious to you, but it is to everyone else.
Yeah, and the way they're able to sort of manipulate him so well, they're like, oh, I really like what you're wearing.
Yeah, because he really loves his sense of style is something he's very proud of. So they compliment his outfit and he's like, oh, they're so nice. And Alexis is like, oh, they are 100% stealing from you. Yeah. When you're not looking.
I guess on that note too, his fashion is
so unique.
Very unique, very all the same sort of colour and style, but all different as well. Like, I love his fashion.
It's so good.
And it's a bit of, would you say it's like a bit of a hyperfixation, that sort of fashion style, or a special interest, I guess?
Yeah, I reckon it is a special interest, and he's got so much pride in his clothes and clothing choices. And then I remember the kind of distress he's in when he goes to take them to a market and they're like, oh, we'd get $20 for these, and like really kind of devaluing his items, and he was so affronted. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really special to him, and the way he expresses himself as well, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Patrick, I'm not sure. I feel like Patrick could be neurotypical. But whatever he is, he's delightful. And he just is so attuned to David.
Yeah.
And so calm and regulated a lot of the time. It's just so lovely. So the first time that Patrick tells David that he loves him, David's reaction is so autistic. And what usually happens in those scenarios a lot of the time is the person who has said that they love you gets offended because they're like, oh, you didn't say it back, or there's an expectation that you would say it back. But a lot of autistic people, like, we don't want to say something we don't mean. Yeah. And it might not be like, I don't think I could love you. Like, maybe I will, but like right now that wouldn't be the truth. So I don't want to say that. Yeah. But Patrick handles it beautifully, and he says, oh gosh, now I can't remember, but something about acknowledging that would be stressful for David.
Yeah, he's already having a stressful day. Doesn't want to add stress to his day. Don't want to add to your, stress to your day, because I know you've had a hard day, but I love you. And I was like, oh, that's gorgeous. He's really...
And
he makes a point of saying, you don't say it back. You don't have to say it back.
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure. It's just me sharing how I feel, which is just a dream for so many of us, I think, would be really... grateful for that kind of, and I know with my friends, I have friends who are like that as well. They'll say, I would love to see you, but if you don't have capacity this week or next week, that is absolutely okay. Which is, it takes so much pressure off.
It's giving that safe zone and that safe space. Like, I would love this, but I understand and I want to accommodate what you need at that time.
Exactly.
And I think Patrick does it so beautifully. Like, and even when he gets really frustrated, like when they're doing the hike and David complains the entire time.
Yeah, and about sensory stuff as well, I noticed.
Yeah, exactly.
The wind and the smell or something, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, he doesn't like, it's very particularly attuned to smells as well. Yes. Like he tells, after they have a hug, he says to Stevie, did you wear deodorant today?
So true.
But yeah, when Patrick proposes to him, even the way he tries to make it something David would love, and then he even buys him like the 5 rings that he sort of similar to what he already has. Gold. Yeah. So he really just gets what makes David and accommodates that in so many ways without giving up himself as well, and while still being who he is, which is a perfect relationship, I think.
I agree. I think they have such a beautiful and I must say, like, as an autistic person, even though David is coded autistic and it's not said that he is, it still was so powerful for me to see representation of a healthy relationship for an autistic person because I suppose so many people have said things like to me that I'm high functioning, or I'm like, oh, you would have been Asperger's back in the day, or whatever, that they think they're giving me a compliment. And it's like, because so much of what people see is my career, and I can pull all of my resources into my career, but I really struggle with relationships, like big time. So seeing what it would look like to have someone understand your needs and meet them was so powerful for me. Yeah, I loved it.
And it also shows you shouldn't settle for someone who doesn't do that. Because it is out there. It's obviously fictional, but I think it is out there.
I've seen it. I've seen it in real life. It's not as common, but it definitely exists. So, it's that or nothing, I'm afraid, if if anyone asks. There's one more thing I wanted to say about David is because I think it is so representative of so many adults' experiences who are unidentified or late identified. He thinks he has anxiety.
Yes.
Right? And there's this, he gets overloaded so much, and he says he's having an anxiety attack. And then he closes the curtains and gets under the doona. He needs low sensory input. And I'm like, mate, you are overloaded. That's not a panic attack. They feel pretty much the same, but the cause is different. It's sensory.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, touch as well. He's very particular about touch.
Yeah, he is.
So that sort of sense there. Because, I noticed that too, like, some of that panic around his driving test too. And for me, like, I was someone who I have generalised anxiety disorder, and driving was something I was really stressed about.
Oh, there's so much to be stressed about.
So much you have to keep track on, and that you're in control of this car that could be out of control as well. I related very much to that episode in particular.
Yeah, learning to drive is really stressful. Yeah. I don't know how anyone learns to drive manual, because that's like extra things that you have to think about on top of the already lots of things.
One last thing I'd like to say is it's sort of not really related to autism, but his analogy, or maybe it sort of does, because I know lots of autistic people love analogies to describe things. His analogy for his sexuality, like I like the wine, not what the label is. So,
the type of wine, just wine, just like
wine.
wine.
Which I thought was really good.
Yeah, so some people do prefer to talk about their feelings in that indirect way. It's just less stressful or confronting. So talking about it through an object is really common for autistic people to do. But then, of course, you've also got autistic people whose language is more literal and do struggle with analogies. Yeah. So again, so much diversity.
Yeah, which is a really good thing to keep in mind. Everyone's brains still work in very different ways. I think on that note, should we talk about Stevie? Because their friendship is a big part of...
Stevie is low masking autistic. She doesn't even attempt to be anything but herself, and I love it.
Because I think she started that conversation about the wine too. She's like, I like red wine, but some people like white wine. What wine do you like? So she just gets David. She sort of sees the world in the same way. Yeah,
like her facial expressions... she's very flat in her face. Her voice is quite monotone. I've noticed she grimaces a lot, so she does that kind of awkward grin when she's uncomfortable. Yeah. So she might not
naturally smile.
No, yeah. So it might look like she's laughing at people, but she's just uncomfortable. So there's so many really classic, I think, traits of autism in Stevie.
Yeah. I love her sarcasm too, which I feel like is a bit of a coping strategy for her as well. Her storyline of sort of trying to figure out what she wants to do as well, like how she's kind of been stuck in the motel most of her life, and it sounds like she's got a bit of a complicated family history where she inherits the motel from her aunt. And then she goes on that journey to sort of figure out what she wants to do. So she tries to do the Larry air hostessing, which is just not her. And then she ends up deciding that what she wants to do is kind of right in front of her. So I guess that sort of sense of sort of rolling with it and not really having a direction and not feeling like you have a lot of control, and then taking some control of that, and that being quite freeing for her.
Yeah, and what happens when she does realise what she wants to do, and all of a sudden it's like powerhouse. She's like, here's a list of all the motels in the area, here's what, and that is so, I notice as well in the adults that I work with, if they're at university, for example, they love the structure. Yeah. Even though there's a lot that's stressful, they're like, I'm working towards this degree, which means I do this unit and that unit, and it's all very structured. And then sometimes leaving uni is really stressful because they're like, well, that doesn't exist in the world. Like you don't have mini goals that you have to set them yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's a great example of that as well. Once she has a direction, she just structures the heck out of it, and it's great.
She just flies, really. Yeah. I really love Stevie. And also just her general, she's not into the sort of mainstream stuff, and she dresses pretty much the same for comfort rather than style.
For comfort, and so unapologetic about it as well. I love it.
Yeah, and I love what she does with the makeup to show
to prove a point.
Johnny, it's a bad gift. And their friendship is so lovely.
It is. They just get each other. They're such a good representation of autistic friendship. They're really blunt with one another. Yeah. I love their friendship.
Can I read out this quote that you put in from the Schitts Creek fandom wiki, I think it was? Yeah. Until she meets her kindred spirit in David, Stevie was by nature aloof, introverted, had few friends and disliked social interaction.
Which is
she still does.
A description of autism.
Yeah, exactly. But David and Stevie just became a perfect match.
They clicked really quickly as well. That's always a dead giveaway, I find whenever people are like, oh, I really struggle to make friends, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I made this friend that I've known for a week. I'm like, oh, okay.
And we just get each other straight away. Yeah. Should we move on to Alexis?
Yes. Alexis is probably my favourite character. I mean, I love them all in their unique ways, but she is extra special. I just see so much of myself in Alexis. And one thing Mum said to me when she watched it and recommended it to me is she was just like, yeah, you have a lot of similarities. Not in our kind of, I don't know, belief system maybe, or values. I'm not fancy bags and rich people is not my thing, but definitely in her day-to-day life, like the room, her side of the room is just so messy and David's is immaculate. I didn't get that kind of minimalist, clean, autistic vibe. I'm very much ADHD dominant in that one. Yeah.
And it sounds like you would say that Alexis is probably ADHD dominant.
ADHD is the one that stood out to me the most with Alexis. And it was ages before I picked some of her autistic traits. Ages. Like it would have been, I reckon, the fourth watch through probably.
Well, let's start with her ADHD traits. Like, apart from a messy room, which is typical.
Yes.
My sister has ADHD, and that was every day was Maz, clean your room. Also, I had to clean my room too, but yeah.
Yep. It's so hard because you clean it and then you feel really accomplished, and then you're like, oh, you have to do this like every week. Yeah. That's boring.
It's too much.
I don't want to do that. So that one for Alexis. She's also just all the stories she tells about her life where she jet set it off here and there and met this guy, and in a week she was in the Greek islands or whatever, and I was like, that is classic. Yeah.
So like she's gotten into trouble a few times accidentally as well.
With the law, she's been arrested.
And the way she talks about those stories too, she often will sort of go off a tangent and relate this to something that happened to her.
In the middle of a conversation. Yeah. She's like, oh, this reminds me of the time I was hanging out with Zac Efron. And it's like, off she goes. Yeah. Oh, also the milk.
Oh, yeah.
that kills me. That entire scene made me so anxious vicariously, like, because I felt for Johnny. I was just so stressed for Johnny. So the context here for listeners who haven't seen it is Johnny asks Alexis to buy some milk to sell because it's this rare unpasteurized, I think, milk. And he goes, let's just get like a little bit, just like an ounce or something, a pint maybe. I forget what measurement he uses.
Something in American.
Yeah. And Alexis comes back with like 13 vats of milk, like a lot of milk, very expensive. And of course you have to sell it quickly because it's fresh. Yeah. So Johnny was quite stressed about that. And he's just saying to her, like, how did you, like, why this many? And she was just like, oh, you said to get like a few thingies of milk.
And she says something like, I was wondering why you would want $300 worth of milk.
Yeah, so that kind of like not checking the details, impulsive, Yeah.
Do you think as well as the fact that she didn't end up graduating high school, she missed out on graduating, and then I guess her in academics, there's some, some fraughtness there, but then goes on to do high school and then study, and she's actually quite good at it.
Yeah, when it's something she's interested in.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's also quite classic of ADHD is, well, I think the misinformation out there is that ADHD means that you would find it hard to study or work always, and that's not the case. So usually if it's something of high interest, the brain can stimulate itself to start tasks and complete tasks much easier than when it's something that you don't really want to do, or it's not interesting, or it's boring, or it's not urgent. So yeah, the fact that she finds her kind of her niche and what she's really interested in, and then can go and excel at it is after struggling in high school is really quite classic of ADHD.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess the singles week that she puts together, when she gets into that, she just really goes for it.
And under pressure too.
Yeah.
It's always like a really short time for Moira, just like, oh, tomorrow, we're having a red carpet event tomorrow. And Alexis just whacks it all together.
Yeah.
In a very short amount of time without falling apart.
Yeah, she can sort of get in the zone and get it done.
Yeah, with the sense of urgency.
I was reading a little bit about how she modelled Alexis's sort of idiosyncrasies and her gestures on the Kardashians, and that she sort of, like her little arms, T-Rex arms. And then I was reading that often people with autism will call them their little T-Rex arms sometimes.
It's so comfortable to kind of just leave them hanging in the air like that for some people.
But apparently she modelled it like off how the Kardashians or Paris Hilton or whatever would hold their little bags.
Yes.
Or have them on their arms. And then she's like, what if we just took away the bags and just had both arms?
It's such a contagious, I would say, mannerism. Like, I noticed, I think when I first started watching Schitts Creek, Mum knew I'd watched it and I didn't tell her because she's like, you're doing Alexis, because I just took on so many mannerisms, which is another thing some of us do when we get really into a movie or a TV show.
Yeah. I have to admit, I've been booping people a lot this week.
That's adorable when she does that.
I love her boop.
And when she goes into Ted's office and does her little tippy taps with her fingers on his filing cabinet, like she's got so many little...
And her hair flicks as well.
Yes, of course.
Was there any particular, in terms of autistic traits, that you saw from her?
So like I said, it took me a long time to pick these up. I think because she's so ADHD dominant. And this reflects real life. Like, people who are ADHD dominant do generally go missed for being autistic as well. Yeah. Because it really overshadows how they socialise. You know, if they're chatty and sociable, and it can really mask some of the autistic traits they have. But an absolute classic from Alexis that just resonated deep in my soul was when Mutt shaves his beard without telling her. And she just freaks out. She's like, why would you do this without speaking to me? Like, and she's so, the way she's looking at him, like she's genuinely disoriented and upset. When I was a kid, Mum came back with a pixie cut and she had really long hair. And I cried, and I couldn't even explain. I was like, I like it, but I don't know. And I was so upset, and it's just because it's different.
A huge change. That you have to get used to.
Yeah.
I also feel like she masks really heavily, and she probably did a lot of masking in New York. And because when her friends are in town and she catches up with them, I feel like we sort of saw Alexis take off the mask a little bit in Schitts Creek and just be sort of more natural in herself, and then as soon as the friends came back, she's like so back into that sort of ditzy hey girl sort of mode.
It's really stark, isn't it? Like, I remember feeling really uncomfortable in that scene the first time I watched it, and I wasn't sure why, and now I can see that it's masking in general, seeing people mask and also seeing myself mask on camera, so uncomfortable. It feels really inauthentic and gross.
And I wonder if she didn't even realise she was doing it until, you know, years later she sees them and just feels herself slipping into that. Yeah. And then you can, the progression of that episode is her realising that these aren't really friends she needs in her life anymore. Yeah,
I don't want to do that. I don't want to be around these people. I was really proud of her. There was so much growth in that episode.
I really love that episode. And I think that's one of the best things about Alexis is she seems so superficial and snobby and quite selfish, but when you get to know her, as she grows throughout Schitts Creek, we've discover that she's actually so selfless and loving and not actually superficial, or she sort of rediscovers that about herself.
Yeah, I agree. She's such good character development. I love her character. There's also quite a few instances of her kind of missing unspoken things. So there's a scene where previously Ted and Alexis kiss, and then they run into her parents at David's store. And the other thing is, before they kiss, Alexis finds out she performed really well in her completing high school as an adult, whatever they call that there, the GED, I think. Yeah. She gets a really good score, and then they kiss. And then they run into her parents, and Ted says, Alexis has some big news, and he's referring to the grades and that she passed. And she says, Ted and I kissed. So that's just one example, but there are so many of those as well, kind of peppered throughout the series, where she really misses the context clues.
Yeah, I guess that's relevant in the vats of milk as well.
Yeah. Oh, that was a great combo of autism ADHD there with the milk. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think another thing I noticed as well is she needs noise around her, or she needs stuff happening. Like when she's dating Mutt, and Mutt just wants to just chill out in silence. She just can't handle it. She just finds it really uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's definitely the ADHD coming through there. She just needs constant stimulation, and exactly.
It's all very common in the entire Rose family, but her fashion as well. And she's always very particular with how she looks, and she always does her hair flawlessly. She's always got a new piece of jewellery. So that sort of...
Do you know what and this is, again, just my attention to detail as an autistic person. I watch this and I'm like, there's not enough room in that wardrobe for all the outfits she has. Where are they?
And same with Moira Rose too. How do they fit them all in?
They don't. They just have a different outfit every episode. And I'm like, that's 5 seasons. I forget. 6 seasons worth of outfits in a very small motel.
One thought I had too in the last episode is, did Moira Rose just have that outfit, that sort of celebrant outfit, lying around waiting for the time
just
where she
waiting
might
for
need
its
it?
moment. Oh, I love that.
Well, is there anything else on Alexis you wanted to mention?
No, I think that's a really good segue to Moira.
Yes, let's talk about Moira. I mean, what do you think? Because she fits in so well with the rest of her family in a potentially autistic diagnosis, but then does it really fit her, or is there something else?
There's something else going on with Moira. I can't pick it. I don't know whether it's bipolar maybe, but she's certainly got many traits, autistic traits, definitely. And if we're operating on the kind of like statistical likelihood, if you've got 2 kids who are neurodivergent, one of the parents is, it's, if you had to choose, it's Moira, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not Johnny.
Yeah.
It could be Johnny, but Moira's the more obvious one.
Yeah.
So I think so, but she also really struggles with her mental health as well.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I'd be keen to get your thoughts. I feel like some of what she goes through could be conceptualized as autistic burnout and overwhelm. Locking yourself in a closet, so many of us have done that because it's dark in there and no one annoys you. Yeah. So it's a good place to kind of regulate. But there's a lot else. There's more going on with more. Like there's a few scenes where you're like, is she hallucinating?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure.
I think also there's a lot of alcohol and drug use in her background too. So I think that could be a way to help cope or to dull some of the overload or the stress of being a Hollywood star, etc. But is there also just general addictive substance addiction going on there as well? She has a lot of narcissistic traits.
Yeah.
And like the way she's obviously a good, like I don't want to say she's a bad parent or a bad mum, but she definitely does those some little narcissistic parenting style attributes, like she often will put Alexis down in terms of her looks. Nothing is ever her fault. There's always someone else to blame, even when it's clearly she's the only person who's created this drama happening. And she'll say, I think it was when Johnny Rose has gone to New York to try and get the deal with the motels, she had a fit, like she heard that it didn't go well, and so she's saying, David and Alexis, you haven't been giving him a good enough vibe, so it's your fault. And it's like, how? So, just the way she treats her kids, particularly David, she's very enmeshed with David. Like, David's sort of her almost golden child.
Well, and do you know, I see this play out in families in practice as well. Like the neurodivergent parent with the similar presentation to their child, they usually have quite a strong bond and they really struggle parenting the child who is also neurodivergent but a completely different presentation to them. And they might have competing needs or no shared interests is the other thing. Like obviously Moira and David share a really eclectic fashion style, whereas Alexis is more of a masking vibe.
Yes.
So they don't really connect. And then when they sit at lunch and they're trying to have a conversation, Alexis and Moira, it's so painfully awkward. Yeah. They just have no idea how to connect. And when they're one-on-one. Yeah,
true. And I guess there's nothing to suggest that doesn't mean she doesn't. It doesn't mean she doesn't have autism. Sorry, that was a weird sentence. But there's just a lot more, I guess. She seems to be the most, she's the most selfish character. Yeah. She's got her own interests at heart. Even by the end of the season, I think she's grown as well. But she's still very much, everything is about me. I like to be the centre of attention. And
Yes.
Like when I think it was Grace is going away, she thinks that the going away party is for her because, of course, everyone knows that I might be going to New York even though I haven't told anybody. So it's that very self-focused.
It is, which is also not that uncommon in autistic people. And I think this is something I like to advocate for, but I have to be really careful because it upsets people really easily.
Yeah.
But we have so much diversity in our population of autistic people that we do have people with narc traits and we do have people who are not very nice. That exists. We're not all like left-leaning social justice warriors. Like we have so much diversity in the autistic population. So I think it's actually what I love about this show is it gives you such a diverse range of people and it even though most people wouldn't know they're watching good representation of neurodivergent traits, which is a bit of a bummer.
Yeah,
but it is
true.
good representation.
Yeah. And that's why I was a little bit nervous about coding or, describing Moira because we don't want to see a negative representation of someone with autism. But of course there are, like you say, autistic people out there with narcissistic traits and she's one of them.
Yeah, and there are also Sheldon Coopers.
Yes.
Like the reason those stereotypes exist is because those people exist, but we also have a lot more other people as well. So the more we broaden that, the better. And what's disappointing is that the only characters that really get like canon autistic are the stereotypical ones, like the good doctor.
Yeah.
And that's Sam from Atypical.
Yes.
Atypical would have been the other show I would have done if not Schitts Creek. His mum and sister are clearly autistic as well.
Yes.
But it's not said.
No.
Sam is the only one with the diagnosis. So
we covered that with Eric Michael Garcia.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I love Eric.
He's
Hi,
so
Eric.
good. Hi, Eric.
He'll probably listen to this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's frustrating that the one that stands out and the one that is given the actual label or canon are the more stereotypical and often played by non-neurodivergent actors as well.
Yeah, and cis men.
Yes.
Usually.
True. I just in terms of Moira, like some of the little quirks she has.
Please.
Like clearly she's a quirky
character.
Like her accent. Do you think that's a bit of an autistic trait or the way she has that emphasis on syllables?
So not syllables, I love that. Microwave. No, she doesn't say that. That's just a thing that's been in my head lately from whoever's saying that on social media.
Yeah, someone heard
Nigella Lawson, I think. Anyway, so Moira, so one thing actually in some of the observation measures that you use in diagnosis is you look at someone's tone of voice or the intonation or basically just how they sound because quite a lot of autistic people do have an atypical sound or how they use their tone of voice. But again, not all. But you might, so we often have kids with an American accent or an English accent.
Worked with a lot of kids.
And I have to ask, is anyone in the family British or did they grow up in England and usually no. And it's just this thing, and there's a bit of a misconception out there that, they just watched a lot of TV. And it's but so do neurotypical kids and they don't develop these accents. So there's usually a different quality or tone in voice in autistic people. So I think Moira's accent is, definitely distinct.
I love her use of words that you don't usually hear.
Oh, her vocab is phenomenal.
Yeah. Catherine O'Hara was saying that she thought of Moira as someone who was learning a new word every day and wanted to insert it in the conversation in the most interesting way.
Yes.
And it definitely comes across like that.
If people have not watched it with captions, I recommend it because I just love pausing it and looking up the words and learning them and integrating them into my own vocabulary. They're great.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
A disgruntled pelican is a personal favourite. Stop acting like a disgruntled pelican. Fantastic.
Also, her wigs seems to be a huge part of her life. They all have names and personalities and they need to be treated in a certain way.
So that personifying.
In a climate-controlled storage box or whatever.
Yeah.
And she also says she has a spreadsheet.
Yes. I mean, who doesn't have a spreadsheet for their special interest collections? I do. No, that's true. So collecting things the tendency to collect, but then beyond that to want to organise them or classify your collections or something is quite an autistic trait. And yeah, the personifying of objects as well. So these wigs have names and she feels very attached to them. And so that as well, I've had some people in assessments talk about when they go shopping, they don't want to take a particular when they take a can of food off the shelf, they feel bad for the other cans that they didn't choose them. So there is that kind of, and in the DSM it says, they call it something really unaffirming. I can't remember it now. I think it's like unusual attachment to objects.
Yeah, which sounds like very judgy. And I think on that note too, a lot of people, they have this view that people with autism don't have empathy or don't have emotional attachment to people, or which is like the opposite of true. And there's often so much empathy that it's difficult to manage.
Yeah, a range of empathy. And I mean, I would love to see a good measure of empathy, because we don't have one.
No.
The one that's used is just strange when you read it. It's like, it even asks, do you care for animals and feel bad when something happens to animals? And then that's not even one of the items that they score. It's like a filler item. And I'm like, that displays empathy, and plenty of autistic people would answer that as yes. But anyway, not a good measure. But I'd be keen to get a good measure, so that way we can look at actually what's the type of empathy people feel in the population, both autistic and non-autistic, because I've met plenty of non-autistic people who aren't great in the empathy department. And again, plenty of autistic people who are hyper empathetic and have low empathy. So I think there's just so much diversity there again.
Yep, definitely. Oh, and I guess just her emotionality too. She's
like, I think
labile. Yes, the first episode, her just screaming at random bursts of emotion.
Yeah, she's
very funny, but yeah.
Yeah, she's really, like, a lot of things happen that she's really reactive to. And Johnny just has so much patience for that. And he's just like, oh, your mum's having one of her moments. Leave her alone today. Yeah, he very much manages her. I do really love as well, even though sometimes I feel like they're sometimes a bit codependent, maybe, Johnny and Moira's relationship and their marriage, because it's often something we don't see a lot. Well, maybe more in really low-rung sitcoms where they just love each other and they have fights, but they love each other. But they do genuinely, like when she goes away in films, like he really misses her. Yeah. We don't see a lot of that in real life. But yeah, it just seems to be a genuinely, like, a good marriage. It does. And you know, actually, as we've been having this conversation today, I'm thinking so many of the relationships in that show are really loving.
Yeah, and healthy.
It's nice. Yeah, and it's nice to see that, because I feel like TV shows generally are really black and white, so it's either they just hate each other or they love each other and it's really not realistic. Yeah. But this has a really good blend of, look, there's challenges and there's disagreements, but we love each other. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially given they're sort of modelled off reality TV stars, where I guess the premise of Schitts Creek is if you take the reality TV family and put them in a town, take all the richness and all the money away from them, you know, how would they cope with that? And it shows that even though, you know, they sort of palmed off the parenting to the nanny and they are very superficial people, they still have such a strong bond and connection and that they can grow together, which, yeah, I don't know if the real life reality stars would be able to do, but it'd be interesting to see.
Gosh, you know, sometimes I come up with these little experiments in my head and I'm like, no, that's why we have ethics, Marie. You can't do that.
Would not get approval. Is that everyone who we think is neurodivergent, or is there anyone else?
Those are the ones I could probably speak to the most. I mean, I feel like there are also other characters that don't get hashed out as much, but who definitely have traits like Roland Schitt. So many, especially in the language department. Like, he's very literal. Misses so many cues. Yep. So I feel like there are definitely other characters who do come across with traits.
With Roland, I read there's this Twitter thread.
Right.
When I Googled, and it was just like labeling all the characters, whether they were neurodivergent or not, and they said Roland is a neurodivergent person's view of a neurotypical person. That was their opinion anyway. Like, he's so abhorrent to start with, and he's so like uncomfortably unpleasant, but then you get to know them and they're actually quite a nice person and they've got depth he turns out to be quite endearing and part of the family almost.
Yeah, and super loyal.
Yeah.
That loyalty. Because I think I didn't really quite get just how much he cared about the Roses.
Yeah.
Until there's a scene, and I can't remember which one it is now, but there's a scene where he really defends them. And I remember being like, oh, I didn't expect that.
In New York, when he overhears them making fun of Johnny.
And that's like right at the end of the series.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I did not expect, like I knew he liked them, but I didn't expect that level of commitment and loyalty.
Yeah.
So that surprised me a bit.
I have to say, Roland is my least favourite character.
Yeah.
And that was probably what
didn't
put me
grow
off
on me
watching it the first time. Because that also the actor Chris Elliott often plays that kind of gross character.
Does he? Yeah.
Like he's in a lot of Farrelly Brothers movies. I think like There's Something About Mary. He
Right.
plays like a similarly really gross guy. Yeah, I don't know. He's sort of represents like bad comedy to me.
It's not my type of comedy either. I don't find his character funny. I find him a bit frustrating. I'm just like, oh, when's this scene going to be over?
Yeah. I don't care about him and Jocelyn's whatever. On that note too, what about Jocelyn?
Jocelyn, I feel, is so neurotypical, but so pleasant.
She's very good at being frustrated, but like putting a smile on anyway.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. She's very neurotypical. So she and you can see her frustration with hinting. Yeah. And so many people not picking it up.
Like when she wants David to plan her baby shower. Yes. And she's like, wouldn't it be great if we had someone like you to plan the baby shower, or you?
Like, and it goes like right over his head.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she does that kind of politeness, talking around an issue type of thing. And then gets frustrated when people aren't picking it up.
Yeah.
And then you see other people get frustrated with her because like, well, why didn't you just say that?
Yeah.
So she definitely gives off big neurotypical vibes. And also Ronnie.
Yeah.
I feel like Ronnie also is big NT vibes.
Yeah.
My favourite is when she's meant to be doing David's bathroom in his shop.
Yeah.
And he sees her out at lunch and one of them kind of calls her out on it. Like, oh, so you don't have time to do the bathroom, but you're here having lunch. And she's like, yeah, I'm having lunch with the person supplying your tiles, which is like such a neurotypical thing to do. It's like, I'll take you out for lunch and befriend you and we'll build this kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Which, doesn't.
But to David, it's like, you should be doing my bathroom now. Why are you here?
Why are you having lunch?
Logically not the right thing you should be doing.
And also such a classic double empathy problem. So like viewing that as the only reason you'd be having lunch in the middle of the day is if you're not working and trying to charge by the hour for lunch when he didn't even go to, maybe she is networking for my bathroom. Yeah. So I think that says a lot as well.
Yeah, definitely. What about Twyla?
Yeah, I loved your notes on Twyla because I'm not sure because she's vague or if we just don't get enough of screen time with Twyla.
Yeah, I feel like there should be a spin-off with Twyla because she intrigues me because she's sort of just so in mysterious. The cafe, but she's also a jazzer gal. But we don't really know anything else about her apart from that she dated Mutt.
Yeah, that was strange to me.
Yeah,
they didn't
seem like a good match.
No.
And in the final season, we find out that she actually won like $45 million.
Yeah,
and is choosing to just stay at the cafe
because she loves working there,
and she doesn't want anyone to know because it changes things.
Yeah, that's
interesting character.
She's such an interesting character, and I can't work out. I think you've popped here that she's clearly had a super traumatic past. We hear about some really awful stories about her family.
Yeah.
She is very over friendly and lets a lot of people walk all over her. Absolutely, like these are things that without any other information is hard to tease apart the effects of trauma.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Yeah. She's probably got some complex PTSD perhaps, and that's how she presents the way she does because she's just comfortable and safe where she is, perhaps. She's not a super assertive person. Like if she's holding a bunch of plates at the cafe and someone says, go do this thing, she just does it. Yeah. She can tell she's a bit miffed by it, but she doesn't ever sort of say, I'm busy.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way Alexis treats her sometimes is quite mean.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree.
I think the only thing we haven't really touched on is Johnny.
Yeah, Johnny's a mystery to me.
I sort of see him as neurotypical.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, he reminds me a lot of my dad, who is not neurotypical. But it's also, they have similar kind of
Yeah.
looks. But he's very logical. He sort of keeps the show running. And gets things done to get everyone all the things they need, which could be sort of a strength of someone with autism, or it could be neurotypical.
So this throws me even in the assessments that I do with adults. Whenever I get a white cis man who is a professional, it's hard work. I have to dig and dig, because when we view through the social model of disability, it's like you would only see experiences of disability where the environment doesn't match that person's needs or skill set. And I think in the current society that we live in, it's easier to get by if you're a working professional as a white cis man. Yeah. Because a lot of the bluntness and directness will come across as like being assertive and having leadership skills.
Being masculine.
And masculine traits. Yeah. So they can kind of sneak under the radar there. And because of that level of privilege as well, of being able to get jobs just based on kind of their experience, not so much their people skills in an interview, we just don't see as much disability. That's not true of everyone. I know plenty of cis men who are really struggling. But in a man like Johnny, it could be, that he is autistic, but we just don't see his struggles because he's so well suited. Yeah. But the fact that he was screwed over by his business partner and had no clue has always kind of like, bothered me. It's like that really trusting nature of like, we're friends, they would never do anything to,
just not notice some of the hints that maybe he wasn't worth trusting. And also he's very much a businessman and able to do a lot of that high profile business work and franchising, etc., which could be the way his brain really works. Like for a lot of, I don't know if this is a stereotype, but a lot of white cis men go into doing like engineer jobs or in those management roles where positions. They can do a lot of complex work because that's
and in a
really
management position, you are controlling the environment. So you can kind of advocate for things to be done the way that makes sense to you. So that's another way that the environment ends up really fitting with their needs.
So it's interesting. But I also find that he gets very frustrated with like Alexis and Moira and David in a way that a neurotypical person would.
Absolutely. Yeah, he does. And that's what I see evidence of both, and it throws me a bit.
Although maybe his logic can become a little bit of a setback in that way. Like, why would you think about it this way? Why don't you think about it my way?
So that's probably the only thing that I really pick up on with Johnny is he does get stuck in his idea. Yeah. And he does struggle to adapt when someone else changes it. Yeah, so that is one thing that I think comes up. But again, I'm not sure, and probably haven't been around enough neurotypical men of his kind of age and demographic to know how to compare it. But I'm just not sure if that would be a classic trait of someone who's used to being a manager for their whole life. Used to managing. And if someone's not fitting the role that they're supposed to fit, then the response would be to sort of manage them out. But you can't do that with his family. Exactly.
I really love Johnny.
He's such a dad vibe.
Yeah, I think it's also Eugene Levy. He's played a lot of dads.
Yeah.
Has there anybody that we haven't touched on that's worth... I guess Patrick was one last one, but I see him as quite neurotypical.
Yeah, I agree. I've met some absolutely lovely neurotypical people in my time who are just so flexible and accommodating and naturally just like that. And I'm not a huge fan of the narrative that neurotypes get along with neurotypes just black and white like that, because I don't think that's the case. I think it's more likely that we would get along with someone with a similar communication style, but there's also heaps of miscommunication that happens. And I think that in general, what makes a good connection is being curious and open to listening and learning, which Patrick absolutely shows.
He really just sits back and observes David and falls in love with him by doing so, which is really lovely. And doesn't try and change him as well, or try and expect him to do something that he wouldn't do. Yeah. Which can often present in relationships of having different expectations on someone based on what you want, but not necessarily what they need or want.
Yeah. Nailed it. I have nothing else to add to that.
All right. So in preparation for today, I had a little bit of a look at anyone on the cast who have said that they're neurodivergent or have any sort of mental health issues. There's not a lot out there. Unfortunately, the world we live in is no one's willing to
So true.
say anything if they are. But there's some hints. Emily Hampshire, who played Stevie, I found this really interesting. She originally requested to submit a taped audition on account of her nerves and recurring hive breakouts. And then she ultimately agreed to audition in person, but she says that she has no recollection of the experience. And according to Dan Levy, who was there, she gave a great audition, then proceeded to lift her shirt over her head to hide and slowly rocked back and forth.
Wow. Oh, that's incredible.
And she's acted throughout her life. So, I just that one makes me wonder if maybe she's got a bit of neurodivergence or
I think
anxiety generally.
Yeah, so anxiety is something that I come up against a lot in my work, as in so much can be explained by anxiety, but it can't actually, though. Because like you said, she's been doing this for most of her life. You, in theory, the more you do something, the less anxious you are about it if it's anxiety. Yeah. So I think the fact that some people just get overwhelmed still, no matter how much they repeat it, is more a sign they're getting overloaded, like their nervous system's not coping. Yeah.
Particularly if it leads to that physical hive breakout as well.
Yeah.
But that's all I could find. But she does Stevie so well, I would not be I'm surprised.
One thing I will say actually is one thing that's a bit frustrating in my position as a psychologist is we can't publicly diagnose people, right? Like it's unethical. And even as an autistic person, I wouldn't want to out someone else because it could be unsafe for them or they may not know that about themselves. Yeah. But there are genuinely some famous people, actors and stuff who are so clearly autistic or ADHD. And I'm like, gosh, I wish you knew and could tell people, because you are great and it would be so great for the community to have you to look to.
Yeah, that representation, particularly in such big popularity positions.
So when, what's his name, the actor from Prison Break?
I don't know. Sorry.
Oh gosh, he had the shaved head and the piercing blue eyes. Anyway, he was diagnosed a few years ago.
Oh, was he?
And he was so open about it. He was like, fantastic. I'm autistic and I use identity first language and I'm here to learn from the community and I'm sorry if I say anything offensive. And I was so like, good. Amazing, because Wentworth Miller.
Oh yeah.
Thanks, brain.
I think that's what I love about when like Josh Thomas came out and said that he's, because of starting a show about an autistic character, he looked into it himself and was like, I'm autistic as well.
Oh, and see, he's one that it was quite obvious to me.
Yeah.
And there've been a few. M. Rossiano was really obvious to me. People were like, Marie, you just think everyone's neurodivergent. I'm like, I'm telling you. And then a few years ago she came out and I was like, yes, nailed it.
Yeah, it's so good. On that note too, Eugene Levy, I couldn't find anything about him specifically in terms of mental health or neurodivergence, but he's been a spokesperson for autism. He said that he has a cousin with autism. And then I think it was 2007, he was lobbying in Canada for the Canada Health Act to include effective science-based treatment for autism for all Canadians. But it seems like it's a bit of an autism speaks thing going on here. Okay. Like he was advocating for treatment for autism. And in the articles I read, they mentioned ABA. So I'm sad to say, well, I mean, that was 2007. Maybe his views have changed. Time ago. But I didn't get anything more recent, apart from the fact there's some autistic people who have, don't love Schitts Creek for that reason and have sort of turned away from being a Eugene Levy fan. But he said, this is something he said in an article. Over the years, my family has been hit by the ravages of cancer, heart disease, muscular dystrophy, diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. Every one of these afflictions is a worthy cause for wholehearted support, and every one of those afflictions has treatment that is covered by Medicare. The treatment for autism is not covered by Medicare. So it's a bit disappointing that he's equating autism with cancer.
Yes,
etc.
That is disappointing. How dare you break my heart in this way, Steph?
I know. I'm so sorry.
No, it's better
Listeners,
to know.
I did warn Marie before.
Yeah, she's like, I have something to tell you, and I was like, oh no. But that 2007, if you think about so when I started practicing and getting my head around neurodiversity was about 5 or 6 years ago, and hardly anyone, and even on Instagram and Twitter, there was nothing really. It was a very, very small community, but now it's just huge and it's growing so quickly and it's so exciting. So if I think about it in that timeline, it's 2007 is a very long time ago.
Yeah. And that's when I was at uni. We got maybe one lecture about developmental disability.
Yeah.
Autism was referenced a couple of times. If I went back to uni now, I'm sure there would be a lot more about it. Well, I don't know, maybe not.
Well, when I was going through my master's program was probably 10 years. You've got 10 years on me, and it was the same deal then. And then I taught third year subjects of undergrad psych for a few years, and developmental psych only covered autism in one lecture, like not even the whole lecture. It was like one bit of a lecture.
So it hasn't really changed.
I think some unis now are trying to like really get ahead, like La Trobe's doing some good things, which is why I chose to do my PhD there. But yeah, it's still not great.
When I was studying too, it was very much medical model. Social model wasn't coming into a lot of the things we were into, not just neurodivergence, but mental illness. So the treatment focus was very prominent then.
Yeah.
So hopefully he's learned. Given that he's got very coded autistic characters in the show that he created with his son.
Yes. Speaking of Dan.
Yes.
What have you got here?
So he did say that he experienced lots of severe anxiety as a child and avoided social situations and used theatre as an escape. I mean, tick, tick, tick.
Yeah.
He did say that he took a lot from his own life in David, but they are also very different in other ways. But even in the last season, he had to wear a neck brace due to the tension that he had from the stress and anxiety of the filming. So he hasn't obviously said anything specifically that I've read, but there's some
little things there that are quite common. You know, I'm not saying that Dan Levy is autistic, but in a lot of referrals that I get for adults who end up being autistic, a lot of the referrals say pretty much what's written here: severe anxiety and stress, avoiding social situations.
So that's interesting. And clearly there's autism in the family too. So,
well, that's the other thing, right? If Eugene Levy has a cousin, we know that neurotypes run in families. So,
and it's interesting that he became a spokesperson, Eugene. Like, usually people have a little bit more affinity with autism to be a spokesperson rather than maybe just a cousin. So I wonder if there's stuff there that we don't know about.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's a good point.
And Catherine O'Hara, I didn't find anything about... But I know that, like, I've watched a lot of her films over the years, particularly Christopher Guest films, Best in Show, A Mighty Wind, Waiting for Guffman. If you haven't seen any of these, go watch them. They're hilarious.
But I've heard of them.
Her character is very similar in a lot of those films.
Right.
Also Beetlejuice. She's got some traits of Moira Rose in there too. So I think she's just very good at playing that very over-dramatic character. But I did find out she has, I don't know if I'm saying this right, situs inversus, which is when your internal organs are sort of flipped, so your heart and lungs are mirrored.
Wow.
And not where they're supposed to be.
Right.
So that's interesting.
That is interesting. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I think it's fairly rare. And Annie Murphy, she did say that she had a period of depression and attributes medication to helping save her life.
Oh, that's good.
It was post Schitts Creek, I think, that she went through quite a depressive spell. And I know a lot of actors, when work sort of stops for a while, they can go into that depression.
Right. Yeah. I have heard people who work in the acting industry talk about the fact that they reckon at least 80% of actors have ADHD. And I think about it from that lens. You go through everyday exciting novel things and then it's gone.
And constant stimulation.
Yeah, that would be really challenging.
It'd be a big like dopamine
crash.
reduction. Crash. Yep, so that makes sense. Is there anything of any of the characters or actors that you know about that I haven't touched on?
No, I don't. I just like to sometimes, if a character is particularly autistic coded, I'll like to go and like look at the actors' socials and see if there's any videos or anything that I can observe.
Yeah, I find myself doing that too. Like, oh, you play that quite well.
Yeah. You're just a really
some lived experience
immaculate actor. I must say, Annie Murphy is a stellar actor.
Yeah, I love her.
Oh my gosh. I'd only ever seen her in Schitts Creek, but then I saw her in Russian Doll.
Yeah, she was amazing.
Oh my gosh.
And so different too.
Yeah,
like,
that's what I mean.
I didn't really recognise her.
Exactly. And that's a good actor.
Yeah.
Like, usually actors stick to the same thing that they do, but those that can have so much diversity in their roles and convince you every time. Like Ryan Gosling's another one.
Yeah,
convincing, so convincing.
And apparently she auditioned for the role of Stevie.
Oh.
And then they were like, nah, maybe you're more of a Alexis. And
Right.
I can't imagine her doing Stevie, but I'm sure she
No.
would have been
She would have nailed it.
good, yeah.
But Alexis is such a joy. Like, I'm so glad that they
Yeah.
got her to do that.
We'll just briefly touch on stereotypes. I think what I love about Schitts Creek is it seems like your typical silly comedy, and then it turns into something else, and it sort of subverts a lot of the usual stereotypes that you see in those kind of comedies. So I sort of only picked up on more subversive stuff, which I think was intentional, like David coming out in a very brief way as pansexual, like using the wine bottle as the metaphor. There was absolutely no homophobia or queerphobia or any of that from the town, even though it's a very country town.
Yeah, you'd expect
Hicksville.
a country Hicksville to be really conservative, wouldn't you? But yeah, it was lovely. And even how Johnny talks about it once at a party, I think someone mentions it, and I think he says something like David just likes who he likes, or something like that. And I was like, that's so casual. I love that.
It's like not a thing.
It's a non-issue.
Yeah. And even when Patrick shares with his parents that he's gay, they're
that's gorgeous.
Yeah, and they're all ready to go into bat for him, and if there's any homophobia, they're all ready to punch it away. And then the family's just like, we just are upset that you didn't want to tell us this.
Yeah.
Which is a totally understandable reaction, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I thought that was so beautiful as well.
So yeah, it's nice to see that representation and that not being a huge plot point as well, just being a brief thing. I also love that Johnny, even though he's very mask presenting, he's quite emotional.
Oh yeah.
And like at David's wedding, he can't help but cry. Like he can't get through the day without crying. And I think that's a nice, like very much not the usual trope of the dad at a wedding. They usually got to be really stoic.
Also, how proactive he is in supporting Moira. I think that subverts traditional masculine norms. He's on it. He can tell when she's not having a good day, and he's there and he's ready.
Yeah, and he supports her like throughout everything. I think just generally it's a nice subversion of the backwards town trope, because everyone in there is actually really delightful and supportive of this rich family. Everyone's really welcoming of the Roses, even though they really shouldn't be, because they're not being treated particularly well by them at first.
Yeah, I always found that a bit strange. Part of me wondered, is it that we're just seeing these like 10 people in the town and everyone else hates them? But then Moira gets elected into council, and I'm like, oh, so maybe not.
Yeah, so she would have had to get votes for that.
Yeah.
Anything else that you thought was either a stereotype or subverts a stereotype?
I think probably just Roland. Is quite a really easy stereotype, and I'm not sure what he adds. People might disagree with me, but I truly feel like you could take him out of the show and it wouldn't really change much.
No, he could have been less of a trope.
Yes.
And it would still be a fine show, I would think. But yeah, if there's anyone listening who his favourite character is Roland, let us know.
Yeah, we could be missing something. Sometimes there are really obvious like characters that have really obvious tropes or stereotypes, and it serves a purpose, and I miss it.
Yeah.
So that could be the case.
Well, I've missed it too.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just finish off with helpful messages or things that we think is helpful about Schitts Creek, and any potentially harmful things. Well, what about yourself? What is helpful for you about Schitts Creek?
Well, I mentioned it before, but it's important, so I'll touch on it again, is I feel like the representation of neurodiversity in this show, whether it's spoken or not, there's such a range of behaviours and traits and communication styles, and it's not presented as a problem ever.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of accommodates everyone else. So I love that. And I love the relationship between David and Patrick, and how you can see Patrick, he's really attuned to David and meets his needs, and they have quite a even partnership, and they both bring very different things to the partnership. Yeah.
I think they're also a great example of a relationship where they're better together as well. Like apart they're lovely people, but they bring something else when they're together.
They're really complementary.
Yeah. They try and bring out the best in each other as well,
yes.
which I think I really love. Do you think because I haven't read anything where anyone said we wanted these characters to be neurodivergent. So do you think it was intentional or do you think it's accidental?
I think a lot of writers write autistic characters or ADHD characters and they don't actually know that that's what they're writing.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because there's tropes that already exist, like the eccentric creative, right? Almost always autistic.
Yeah.
Or ADHD or both. The manic pixie dream girl.
Yes.
Classic autistic girl. Classic. Yep. So, yeah, I think writers do write that. And the other thing that I think is because, let's say, in creative industries like film and TV, there would be a higher proportion of neurodivergent people. They're writing traits that they see every day that they probably have no idea.
Or they see in themselves.
Or they see in themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Jeremy Andrew Davis about Wednesday.
I loved that episode.
And that's how he identified that he's probably autistic, because he was writing this character and he was like, oh, it's me.
Yeah.
And they seem autistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think, though, it would have been better if they had labelled?
It would have been great to, I think, at least David, because he's probably the more obvious one. And that's usually the character that gets labelled. But even then, if David were labelled as autistic, he's still such a good representation that's not super stereotypical. So even though he's more classic than, say, Alexis, he's still really different from Sheldon Cooper.
Yeah, hugely.
So, that would have been great.
And to be honest, I think it was also more accurate that they wouldn't have had a diagnosis, because they're such a rich, powerful family in that popular sphere that they probably wouldn't have even thought that this is something they should chase up.
And when you have that much money, you can really accommodate disability. Like, I just think about, even if I were like a millionaire, let's say, just a couple of million, I could have a personal assistant to do all my executive function for me. Like, that would be life-changing. And so there is so much that money can buy you that can support disability, and you wouldn't then see the effects of disability.
And you wouldn't necessarily need that diagnosis to get support, because you've got the support anyway.
Self-fund it. Yeah.
I think it's a very wholesome representation of siblingship. So Alexis and David they're so in tune with each other as well, and they do rib on each other and get together and rib on mum and dad as well, which is very similar to my sibling vibe as well. And I just love seeing that. It's not like slap in your face as well, because they both get annoyed with each other.
Oh, yeah.
But they're always there for each other at the same time.
Yes. I love their relationship. And it reminds me a bit of my brother and I as well. And when Mutt gets Alexis a bike and and she's just like, help me. Like, she doesn't know how to say she doesn't want the bike. And as soon as Mutt walks in, David's like, oh, Alexis loves the bike, and he's just like ripping into her. And then, so she's like, shh, David. Their relationship's so great. And another one, she's giving him crap about something, and he's like, eat glass. And I'm just, classic line. Classic.
Eat glass.
Yeah. So they really dig into each other, but which my brother and I don't at all, and never have, and people think that's weird. Like, we just don't. We're 10 years apart though, so I think that's why.
Me and my brother were 4 years apart, and we also never fought.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a relationship sometimes.
It is. But that kind of classic, like, I am really chaotic, ADHD. My brother is super chill and like stoic. And so I sometimes, we can't video game together because he wants to play the main storyline and I go on all of the side quests and I pick up every rock to check there's not a jewel under there or something. And he's just like, oh my God. So yeah, I don't know. I think
if you're playing together on the one team, then you'd be perfect, because you could do the side quest, you could do the main storyline.
But I don't know of any games that exist like that.
I don't know either. I'm not a gamer.
He just gets so frustrated when he watches me game. He's like, what are you doing? Keep going. I'm just like on all these tangents. I'm like, oh, that looks pretty. I'll go over there. Poor thing. But lovely representation of siblingship, I agree.
Yeah. And I particularly love the last episode when they get married. that Alexis is wearing a white dress and she's walking David down the aisle, and there's already a to-do like, oh, it looks like we're getting married. And then Roland says, it looks like they're getting married. And Johnny's just like, yeah, and he smiles. And I love that because particularly my sister and brother, they were living together all of the last 2 years, and I absolutely know for a fact that my son thought they were a couple and they were married. And a lot of people, when I introduced them to people, were like, oh, is that his girlfriend? And like, no, they're siblings. Because they were just so close. And I don't think there's many representations of a close siblingship that's just a close siblingship and
absolutely
love each other and do everything together.
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful.
My brother is like not at all open to this, but I would live with him. Right. And I think that's...
Did you hear that?
Yeah. I think that's why as well people like neurotypical kind of or neuronorms is, you know, grown-ups don't live with their siblings. But like some siblings are that close and it's so lovely and that would be fine.
Yeah. And there's many times throughout the series that they probably didn't need to all be living in that
for sure
conjoined motel room, but they did. Yeah. So there's just so much goodness in it. It's so like it's a comfort watch for so many people for good reason.
Yeah, it's great. And if you haven't seen it and you're just listening to this because you're like, I want to hear what Marie has to say, like go watch it. It's so good.
And then watch it a few more times.
Push through season 1.
Yeah.
It's good, but it gets way better.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything harmful in it, do you think?
I really struggled to think of anything, to be honest. It would have been good to have more diverse bodies in the cast.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit more cultural diversity, although there's a few, like there's Ronnie, but it's pretty white as well.
It is pretty white. And I did wonder if that would be the demographic of a small town in the US, but still it also would have been good to have more queer relationships in the show, but this is really nitpicking, I think.
I agree. And I think it's relevant to the Rose family being, you know, a celebrity family. Of course they're going to be very focused on being a certain size and weight, so it makes sense that there wouldn't be as much size diversity, but it would have been nice.
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that this is the only thing I thought, the fact that at the end they kind of go back to, like Moira goes back into acting, she goes back on...
Oh, that bothered me.
Yeah.
How they all kind of go back to
Johnny
where
goes
they
back to being
almost.
a businessman.
Yeah, it did bother me. I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about it felt like, not where it was naturally progressing to as an ending.
It felt a bit privileged too, like...
I think that's what it is, yeah.
Yeah, we've had to lose everything to come to this town, but now we get to have it all again. Oh, thank goodness.
Yes.
Which was the whole...
I got goosebumps, that's it. Yeah, it must be that, because, something didn't sit right with me and I couldn't quite... Yeah, it almost felt like an easy ending.
Yeah, like a bit of a cop-out.
Yeah.
I think the purpose of it is that they learn and they grow and they become better people. But it would have been nice for them to be happy where they were rather than continue with their success where they were before. Yeah,
that's true. I was also really disappointed about Alexis and Ted.
Yeah, same. I wanted them to give it a good go.
I know, give it a good go at the long distance. I think... with how busy they both are, it probably would have worked.
Yeah, true. I wonder if the purpose of that was showing that Alexis could be completely selfless.
That I loved. I did love that.
She wanted Ted to be with her. She wanted him to do what he needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I did love that. And in my head, they get back together in a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surely.
That's what happens.
Yeah. I couldn't think of anything else as well. I guess there would be a danger of if they didn't grow and change and they are these neurodivergent coded characters that they could have been one note and maybe not a great representation. But because we do see their depths, then I think it's a pretty helpful.
Yeah, like I said, character development's probably one of my favourite things about this show. You just watch them grow and learn so much.
That's what I'm always drawn to in a sitcom or a show.
Same. It's almost like we're psychologists. Show me the growth.
What happened in their backstory? I need to know. Well, is there anything else you wanted to mention or last thoughts about Schitts Creek?
No, I think actually we covered so much.
We did. I'm impressed.
I'm really impressed. Yeah, I mean, I know I'm on this episode, but I feel like I'm going to love this episode.
That's great.
Because I loved having this conversation, and I'm going to love listening to it back again and absorbing more as well.
Because I know a lot of guests who, you know, aren't podcasters themselves will go, I don't want to listen to myself. I can't do it.
I don't want to listen to my voice. That's true. But I'll tolerate it.
You get used to it after a while. Trust me.
Yeah. You just, I don't know about other people. I process more on more listens. Like there'll be things I missed or didn't land when you said it in real time, and I'll listen back and be like, oh, wow, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Marie. It's been a wonderful chat.
Such a pleasure, actually. Not like neurotypical, like being polite, like actually a pleasure.
Oh, good. How can people get in touch with you and follow you on social media, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram as @Marie Camin, MarieCamin, and that's where I'm the most active, to be honest. So that would be the place. I also have some resources actually on my website.
Oh yes, please share.
Yeah, free ones. So that's also just mariecamin.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. And I'll make sure to link them in the episode notes too.
There's some sassy stickers there too, which I'm very proud of.
I love your stickers. You should definitely get your hands on some of those, listeners.
This podcast is not designed to be therapeutic, prescriptive, or constitute a formal diagnosis for any listener. For a longer version of this disclaimer, please check the episode notes on your podcast app.